All right, well, it's game time, and we're having a chat about the Olympics at a time when the Olympics are on. I just want to really start with the first question. I mean, you're watching the Olympics. Every time I'm watching the Olympics, I'm thinking about 2032 and what that experience is going to be like in 8 years. Harvey, you've been in the business for a long, long time. Tell us about what you're viewing right now and thinking about 2032 as you watch the games.
Well, I am watching it, and you know, I love the way that they've taken some of the great things about Paris and brought those forward into the event. I think that's terrific, and I think it will help Paris with its tourism journey because it needed a bit of a spark up as well.
Yep.
I was never a fan of the concept of doing an opening ceremony on the Seine. Just from a entertainment production point of view, I understand all the things that could go wrong, and you know, you've got athletes on there who are part obscured because of the structure of the craft that they're on, and those things, and I think that makes it difficult for that passion for the Olympics and the passion for the athletes who otherwise walk into a stadium with their flags and they're patting each other on the back and taking selfies and those, just that passion of the athletes to me didn't come through. But you can't say they didn't give it a jolly good crack. It was an artistic production as well, and you've got to admire the French for at least having a crack at that.
Having a go.
Not for the Brisbane River for me.
Now, ASM Global, for those that aren't familiar with what you do and the lens through which you look, just give us a brief sort of overview of what you guys do at ASM.
Thank you. We're just over 400 venues around the world. And from my part of the business, I have Japan through to the Middle East, everything south. So we're 33 venues at the moment, and with a fantastic pipeline, so we'll double the business inside the next 5 years, Olympics or no Olympics. And we're just in the middle of a major international merge that might be announced in the next half an hour or so. And that will grow the company another step again, so it's very exciting. We're in the business of stadiums, indoor and roof stadiums, entertainment arenas, convention exhibition centres, and then live theatres and amphitheatres. That pretty much rounds it out for us, and the content that go in them.
And a Brizzy local.
Yes, always lived in Brisbane, always holidayed on the Gold Coast, and you can work anywhere in the world from southeast Queensland. There's no need to have to travel nearly as much as we used to. Now with Teams and Zoom, I think COVID taught us a heck of a lot, and I think we probably work better with our employees out in foreign regions, much easier to do it in Teams. I think we do it better than we used to.
Penny, I want to just get your perspective on the games and what you're seeing at the moment, and we'll get into the building program very shortly. But you come at it from a Arab's point of view, design disciplines, engineering disciplines, and everything in between. How are you viewing the current Paris Games, and what are you seeing there that's going to inform what you're thinking about for 2032?
Well, obviously, like everyone, it's been brilliant to see how successful the Aussies have been. My favourite Olympian now is Harry Garside, after his amazing passion, and just it truly shows how you put everything on the line and how much Australia has gotten around him for being so vulnerable. But we're hugely watching around how the city's operating. It's a dispersed games. It's very unlike Rio and London, Tokyo in the past. So how's the city and sort of region operating? Because we can do a lot of learning from that. I'm also very much watching how the opening ceremony went. We've been advising on the athletes' security, so I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit of the lessons learnt and interesting stories that have come from that as well. But also looking at all the new sports and what we're going to bring into Brisbane. There's a lot of billboards, there's a lot of momentum also celebrating Brisbane 2032 and how exciting it can be, and what sort of global eyes are starting to recognise that Brisbane and southeast Queensland is probably a lot better than Sydney and Melbourne. So we're putting ourselves on the global stage, which is amazing.
Truly is. Jack, and just on your perspective as you're watching Paris at the moment, how are you thinking about 2032?
It's exciting, but obviously some fear about just the amount of construction to get done from a Hutchie's perspective. A few other little things I've noticed, like the village doesn't seem quite ideal, and I think if Brisbane's going to be a success, the Olympic Village really needs to be used to fix this housing issue that's growing long after the Olympics. So whether that's, I think there'll likely be build-to-rent towers and there'll be private operators, but making sure that the accommodation's actually useful long-term, because I'm sure everyone's noticed a few more tents spotting up or popping up along the river. Yeah. So probably that's another thing, but as a fan, it's great to watch, and as a Brisbaneite, it's exciting that we'll be on that world stage in 8 years.
So we got 8 years, and there's been a lot of work done to this point in time. I just want a quick perspective from each of you in terms of what your involvement has been up until this point in time. I'll go back the other way. Jack, what have you guys done up until now in terms of engaging with government, looking at the building program, costing it up and understanding exactly what's got to be done?
Yeah, so we've been kept up to date the whole time. The state have had various Teams meetings with their plans, so we have been kept up to date, but large-scale managing contractor government jobs, we're not really involved in the design and planning until a bit later than a typical private developer ECI or DNC job, when we're involved quite early. But now we're well and truly involved. So we've either submitted EOIs or are currently tendering on the stadium at Kawana, the indoor sports centre there, Chandler. We'll probably sit out whatever the major stadium turns out to be. Currently, the refurb of Suncorp, the Gabba and Nathan. Every huge project Hutchies has missed out on in the past, we end up being relieved. $2 billion contracts, kind of, even though we have a serious balance sheet and a lot of talented people internally, putting all your eggs in one massive project like that probably won't be for us. But all of the periphery stadiums, or minor venues, I think they're called, but they're still very large jobs, we'll participate in. So I think we'll win our fair share of work, hopefully. We'll also obviously participate in the village as probably one of the only tower builders left in Brisbane. There are a few others, but that sector's obviously been tough for builders the past few years. But yes, we'll play our part, but yeah, probably not in whatever the major stadium ends up to be.
Penny, from your point of view and the broader company's point of view, what's been the engagement up until this point, and where are we now from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think everyone's very nervous that there's a lot of noise and negativity at the moment around the time we've taken to get where we are. I think we've still got a huge amount of time and opportunity. We've been involved to date in a number of the PVRs or business cases on some of the bigger and smaller venues, but also we've been hugely looking at what that means in legacy. So we've also been involved in the inclusion and accessibility strategy for all the venues and villages, which I think is brilliant and one of our major pillars in why we're doing what we're doing around access and inclusion for all, well and truly beyond the event. And I think that's something also we're hugely looking at. This is a huge catalyst or acceleration moment for us as a region and a state, and our cities and communities, that a 4-week event creates such opportunity for us. So we're really looking at all the things that happen beyond the venues and villages that will last a long time and create a lot of choice and opportunity for us around housing, education, jobs and mobility. So a lot of those major transport corridors also. Yeah.
And Harvey, from your point of view, obviously a heap of engagement around the Brisbane Live concept on the top of Roma Street Station, and that's adjusted and changed. Where's that at, and what other involvement have you had to this point?
Well, firstly, we were very heavily involved in Sydney Olympics and still operate today the major arena that was developed for that, and also for 20 years for the term of the concession. We operated the Stadium Australia project in Sydney, and of course all of our staff worked on that. Because the way the Olympics used to work is that, and it did in Sydney, and it was about the last that had happened, but SOCOG actually took control of every venue, set up their own management structure, went into every venue. The general manager had to leave the venue, and SOCOG's general manager would sit at the desk and still the pens and pencils are in the drawer. They replaced the catering operator and brought in their own caterers and just replicated everything. Massive amount of cost. Of course, our general manager had to step out, but all of our staff remained, and they just under the direction of a different general manager. We then worked on Beijing, on the stadium, the aquatic centre, and we ran the arena in Beijing for basketball. And by then it had all changed. China did it differently, and everybody has done it differently since then. So what we're seeing now is the IOC wanting to see that existing venues are used where possible, because they get a lot of flack around the world, and particularly from the sporting organisations, about you come in and you require cities to build all of these things. And a lot of that comes out of sports budgets. And I've seen it over the years where after big events, even just for a single sport event, and that sport talks to government and says, well, we now need some more funding. There's this huge public demand to play our sport. And government says, well, we've just spent 250 million or 2.5 billion on your sport. Well, you've built the piece of social infrastructure, but you haven't actually done anything for the sport at all. That's always been a tension between sporting associations and government. So we've been quite heavily involved because of all the planning work that's been done about which venues they're going to use. All of our venues in Brisbane are all being used. The Convention Centre at South Bank and Suncorp Stadium, the Entertainment Centre, and Brisbane Live, which I believe will happen. It won't be called Brisbane Live, it'll be called Brisbane Arena, as Suncorp will be called Brisbane Stadium for the Olympics. And I'm very, very confident that as long as Penny and her team write the right things in the PVR, I think government will get on with that pretty quickly. And can I say that the Brisbane Arena was, whoops, I'm an old roadie, hang on a minute. The Brisbane Arena was never about the Olympic Games. This is 2007. It was then the Campbell-Newman government, and we said to them, you know what, this Brisbane is going to need a proper arena, because the one that was built at Boondall was part of an 11-venue complex for the Olympic Games for '96, which ended up being won by Barcelona. Olympic rules say that you have to have, for different size venues, hundreds of metres of clear space around the individual venues for the entire period of the Games. That's for security, but it's also for merchandising and scalpers and a whole range of things. And that's why cities around the world built Sydney Olympic Parks, and Brisbane was going to have a Brisbane Olympic Park. We believed that Brisbane actually needed not just an arena that was built to host boxing and gymnastics, but one to host all of the entertainment forms that we do in the buildings around the world these days. So it's fortuitous that the Olympics came along. At the same time, it sort of slows the process down a bit, because, okay, well, that's going to be used for the Olympics, so we need that in 2032. We actually need it in 2002. And so we've been pushing pretty hard to get that to happen.
So let's talk about the actual building program. I remember recently I spoke with one of your colleagues, and he was telling me that that you guys had done some analysis and costed up what was required to be
PD.
It was PD, and what was required to not just deliver upon the stadium infrastructure and all the other direct games-related infrastructure, but also the 14,000 hotel rooms that needed to be refurbished, and all the other kind of multiplier effects that are going to come through the city. And he landed somewhere around that $50 billion mark over the next 8 to 10 years. So an enormous amount of work that needs to happen. You guys are one part of the construction sector in southeast Queensland, and a very important, significant part of it. but you can only do so much as well. So how is this question of capacity going to actually be addressed, and how are you guys looking at it, both as Hutchies the business, but as Hutchies the business within a broader construction sector?
Yeah, it's a massive issue. And I think the other thing, builders have been through a boom post-COVID, mostly an apartment boom and mostly here on the Gold Coast. But the rain and the inflation has led to a fair few builders being a bit spooked, as I'm sure some people in the room have felt when trying to talk to builders the past few years. We're hungry and we're open for business and we're keen to play our part, but we are limited by the capacity of the labour force, the subcontractor pool, and the reality is there's a big spend anyway by state governments. So with the biggest Queensland Health Hospital spend that's kind of kicking off now, the biggest school spend ever, and then coupled with a massive Olympic spend and a housing crisis, the capacity of the construction industry is going to be very tested. I don't know how that quite plays out. For us as builders, all we can do is be selective and choose jobs where we've lined up subcontractors and we have that certainty that we can deliver. And the other thing is negotiating fairer contract terms. I think it's going to be hard for private developers, especially the years 2027 to 29. The industry is going to be at full capacity then, is what we're forecasting, should everything go ahead. And I think it'll be difficult for private developers to line up builders on fixed sum D&C contracts for 3 years over that period, because we're going to have a very stretched labour force. So I think builders will be asking of you and financiers to hopefully help provisionalise some things or allow longer programs or more innovative style of procurement methods, like the kind of managing contractor deals we do with government. I don't mean to be biased or builder side, but I think that's kind of the way it will go, because it will be very difficult for a builder to fix a cost in 2027 knowing there's this mountain of work over the horizon. So yeah, it's going to be tough, I think. I think we'll get there as a city, and I'm pro the Olympics, but as a builder it is nerve-wracking just the amount that needs to get done, especially between the years of 2027 and 2029.
And just break that down for us, Jack. Like what actually needs to get done? There's obviously the stadiums and the places where the sport will occur, and then there's accommodation, there's the games village. But what are all the other pieces of that? Can you just help everyone understand what outside of the obvious needs to be constructed as part of the games?
Yes, so there's the major stadiums, obviously. Whether that changes with a change of politics, who knows? But then there's large minor venues. So again, that stadium I mentioned in Kawana on the Sunshine Coast earlier, that's still a several $100 million job. There's all the indoor sports centres that need to be completed. There's a ton of transport infrastructure. And then, like I mentioned, there was a big social infrastructure program, so schools and hospitals. And they're hospital beds we need, they're schoolrooms we need, that was kind of brought forward to allow capacity for the industry to deliver the games, that will still be under construction when a lot of the games construction start. I'm probably less aware of transport infrastructure. Maybe Penny probably has a better idea of that than me. We do Queensland Rail accessibility upgrades, but we're not big transport builders. We don't build tunnels or rail lines. But there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. And then I think the Games Village itself is roughly 20 towers in Brisbane, and then a few towers on the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast as well. So that's already quite a lot of cranes in the sky just for the village alone. So there's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
You've got to be a busy guy.
Yeah, well, I think we've forecasted about roughly 10,000 workers will be needed for games projects alone, which is about 5 to 10% of the industry's capacity as far as pure labour on site. And then, yeah, you throw in all those other government jobs. If I was a private developer, I would just be a little worried, how am I going to compete with the government to get apartments built? Because obviously we need new private apartments built too. So there's just going to be this competition for labour and subcontractors and builders too over the next few years, and we're all just going to have to live with it as a growing pain of becoming an Olympic city.
Penny, from your point of view, the transport infrastructure, I'm interested to understand that, and if you could perhaps unpack the requirements from a transport point of view, what needs to be done, and I guess what benefit and legacy will live on beyond the Games.
Yeah, I think that's a good point both Jack and Harvey have made around just looking at this as, we really look at this in a sort of 1, 3, 10, 30-year horizon. And I think the opportunity, understanding sort of 30 years beyond and working back from that around how do we create amazing events and venues that actually will bring us a social, economic and environmental return to us well beyond the 4-week event. How do we acknowledge that there is a huge amount of disruption to our cities and regions over the next 20 years? And how do we actually proactively work with that? Some of that is sort of around those short-term trips and operations. So we're watching Paris at the moment. Everyone has evacuated. And it's well and truly well beyond 4 weeks that this disruption happens. So how are we proactively looking at that from an operational readiness and making sure that our small, medium and large businesses thrive as a result of this in our CBDs? We're not locking people in or out, and we're actually connecting across Brisbane, the Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, and all across the state. And I think also leveraging and accelerating some of that agenda around connecting some of our fastest growing regions north through combination of rail, active transport and sort of transport corridors, south to the Gold Coast, and also hugely looking at what are our western and eastern corridors as well, and how do we actually use this excitement and this private and public sector money that's coming not just locally but globally into unlocking this as an amazing city, region, state, and putting us on the global stage as well. So like Jack said, there is a huge amount of work coming. I think there's enough for everyone. I think all of us sort of get phone calls from excited people from outside of Queensland that are really interested in getting involved, and I'm always really keen to embrace it because I'm not born and bred Brisbane, but I have hugely seen the light and this is home. So the more we can get the excitement and engagement, the better.
Just a quick one on Paris. What are the locals doing? Are most people getting out of town, like as a proportion of the total city? Like how many, like from a Brisbane point of view, is everyone going to Noosa during that 4-week period? Because it's just going to be so, because it's going to be all the Gold Coast, because it's going to be so hectic, or the farm or something. Like what's the pattern of local behaviour typically during the Olympics? Do you guys track that?
I haven't seen, I have only heard what the media are saying around people have sort of
What happened in Sydney?
Yeah, there was a lot of people moved out at that time. Of course, we didn't have Airbnb as strong as it is now. So, there's an opportunity for people to move out to...
even more incentive, right?
Even more incentive. But we were just talking out the back before. Even the Tamworth Country Music Festival, half the people in Tamworth move out. I mean, this just happens when major events come along, and I think Airbnb has added a whole new parameter to that.
So Harvey, you would have built many stadiums over your time, or been involved in the construction of stadiums. I just want to get your take on this big question, the remaining question of the major stadium in southeast Queensland for the Olympics. Do you have a view? Do you have a public view?
You asked me an easy question like the one you asked Jack. and in fact, on what Jack's answer was, I think he's spot on. It's what we're seeing in the construction sector right across the country. We're seeing a move to government having to deliver projects with government carrying more risk than they ever wanted to carry. And I've got myself in trouble telling some people over the years that, well, that's because they screwed the builders and the developers way too hard. Well, I think it's right, and I think that has turned, and so we're seeing government now in most of the states actually recognising that they do need to take some of that risk. They've also backed off a little from PPPs, and because PPPs, as this room would know, was originally a British concept which transferred all risk. Like, well, what about what's under that road? Well, you just price it and tell us. And they transferred all risk. And there's been some war stories. We're in 3 PPPs, so we know how they work. And I'm starting to see governments again looking at engaging PPPs, and maybe the Queensland government even. And I don't think it will matter what political colour the government is. I'm seeing an opportunity for PPPs to be readdressed, but maybe not traditional. So, so instead of all risk and everything being passed across, government keeping some, In our instance, we're being approached to be engaged as an operator separate from the PPP and sitting on the government side of the table, and we sit on both sides in some of these projects. So we're seeing some of those changes. So I think the way that Jack's reading it is pretty much what we're seeing everywhere.
I'll throw you a backup question.
Have I run out of time on
No,
having
you're
to
right.
answer the other one?
I look at what the Sphere in Las Vegas as
Great building.
an incredibly fascinating piece of entertainment infrastructure. And I look at SoFi Stadium, for example, and the way that technology is now coming so deep into the experience that it's electric. It's almost out of this world in a true sense. What do you reckon the stadium needs to be like, the main stadium, that main sort of marquee experience? What sort of experience does it need to be for Brisbane 2032, in your opinion? How far can we push the boat out, and how do you get it backed by government that's bold enough with a vision that can get it done?
Well, firstly, the decision has to be made about what it's going to be used for, long term. And then how can that be adapted so that it's open to government to offer it forward to the Brisbane Organising Committee to whether they want to use it, whether it's for opening ceremony and athletics and closing ceremony like we had to do in Sydney, or whether it's not. But there are some cracker stadiums around the world that we're lucky to see all of those, and within our family of venues now will be SoFi Stadium. We already have the Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. You look at the stadium for Real Madrid with 7 stories underground. It has 3 entirely different playing surfaces that all disappear underground, and the grass grows hydroponically. So it's got a full synthetic surface, a full grass surface, and then a concert deck as well. Someone has to make a decision about what the long-term use is, and then we adapt for the use for other sports.
Surely some of your designers internally within ARIT would be, getting super excited by the opportunity to really flex. I mean, if an Olympics in your hometown is not a reason to flex your creative muscle, then really what is, from a designer's point of view? So I just want to understand how you guys internally within the business are designing and conceptualising some of these experiences through the lens of how technology's changing over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and look, we have a lot of excited people. We also have a lot of people that have suddenly seen Brisbane as a place they might relocate to, from people that sort of worked on the Bird's Nest or the Water Cube, stadiums all around the world, which is great. I think technology is one thing we need to be really aware of and really invest in. You always want to be better than the last. SoFi Stadium I've been in the virtual and physical experience is phenomenal. But I don't think we're moving probably fast enough in that space. When I started working on London in 2007, I had a flip phone, and by 2012 I was heavily reliant on everything to make my decisions on movement and programming through an iPhone, and that was just over 5 years. So I do think we need to be looking at that hugely. I think what Harvey said is spot on as well. We're missing attractions in southeast Queensland like Taylor Swift, lover or hater, because we just don't have a venue here for that sort of entertainment and sort of investment for us. So I do think understanding what the legacy use is, investment in technology, and embrace the excitement.
And not wanting to conflict with what Penny said, do you want the real facts about why Taylor Swift wasn't here?
Yep.
So
Don't ruin
I'll pass this on to
story
my
about
daughter.
the economics.
I'll pass this on to my daughters. Yeah.
yeah, you're talking about from the economics, and you're absolutely correct. But Taylor Swift, in this tour of the world, only doing 1 city per week anywhere, whether it's 2 shows or 6 shows, so that they don't burn her out from in and out of hotels and airports, and she's travelling and flying privately, but it's a big drain. It's the biggest drain on performing artists. And so they decided in all of Asia they'd only do 2 cities, Tokyo and Singapore. They would have done Hong Kong as well, although the Hong Kong Stadium at Kai Tak that we're working on won't be open until early next year. So just 2 cities, and then 3 in Australia, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. And they were putting the run together. There's a lot of steel in the production for those who saw it, so you need a week to move the steel, and then the full week in the city for the production. And they ran into a problem in Tokyo, and there was a game at the Tokyo Dome. I think it was baseball, but I just can't remember exactly. And they had to move the week to get Tokyo. And that meant that they were a week short for Australia. So you've got an option of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Which city would you play? Well, firstly, the one that's got 7.5 million people in its region, you'd tick firstly. That was Sydney. And the one that's got 5.5 is Melbourne, and so they ticked that. So it made absolute sense. Unfortunate for Brisbane that it dropped off. So we actually tried to have a discussion with them about, well, what about after you've done Sydney and Melbourne and you're going to Singapore, you're actually going to have a week off. So we offered to buy 4 shows for Suncorp Stadium for Taylor to do for the first time in her career, Taylor Swift Unplugged. And the guys from Frontier Touring in Melbourne were fantastic about it, but Taylor had committed to her touring crew that she would take them on that week off, like 1 week in a world tour with nothing to do, you know, that's gold. And she'd promised she'd take them to the Great Barrier Reef, and they went to Hamilton Island and they had a break. And I've got to hand it to her. She cares so much about her production, there was no way she was going to take that week away from them. And so Brisbane didn't get that opportunity.
Is it weird that the most fascinating thing about Urbanity this year is why Taylor Swift didn't pick Brisbane? That's amazing. That's the best story of the whole 3 days. Love that. I'll pass that on. Just finally, we do have a really good audience question in and around modular. We've heard a bit today about, not today, over the course of the week, about just this pressing need for modular and prefab to have their time in the sun and really accelerate things around productivity and construction. From a games village point of view, we've seen in Paris cardboard beds and protein-free meals, which haven't been super popular from an athlete's point of view.
No air conditioning in the
and no aircon
in the middle
as
of
well.
summer.
Yeah. Luckily it's our winter. But just from your perspective, you're going to look seriously and be involved in the building of part of the games village. Mm-hmm. Is modular prefab, is it going to be an innovative kind of construction approach from?
Yeah, I think
that part of the brief.
Yeah, I think there'll be likely modular components. So in high-rise construction, they're still obviously concrete framed or steel framed with thin concrete slab buildings, which is done in situ. You can modulise on large surface areas some modular slabs, but typically in high-rise, I think the actual structure will be in situ. But it's likely that they'll be modularised. Bathroom pods, I think they typically stack up in student accommodation or build-to-rent towers where the floor plates are very typical. So I think, yeah, modular will play some role in the games village. It's currently playing a role in building hospitals and schools for remote and regional areas in Queensland. So we do a lot of work with the state building modular schools and hospitals. And modular's, yeah, a great part of our business. We'd love to have more of it. It's predictable. We do it under a shed. But it's still expensive in the city to build a modular school. I think that's what some people don't quite understand is often, you know, to build a modular house and plonk it in a suburb in Brisbane is still going to be more expensive than to get a house builder to build it in situ. So I think modular will play its role in modularise, I'm struggling with that word, components of high-rise in the village and in some of the regional towns, but I wouldn't expect in 4 years to see Lego being put together in Brisbane CBD.
Harvey, Penny, Jack, thank you so much for closing out this morning's session. Would you please thank our speakers today?